What's going on, guys? This is Skyhound, also known as Geek Archivist Xavier Pierce, and welcome to episode 8 of the Retro Rev section of Geek Archivist podcast. As you can tell, I'm covering the 1991 film Backdraft, and as you obviously can see from here on the banner, we recently learned about the passing of legendary actor Donald Sutherland, the father of actor Kiefer Sutherland. Now, I want to be clear that most of what I'm going over, I know the movie is like, 2 hours, 10 minutes in length, roughly around there. But for something so long, I'm just going to go over the main bits. But before I get into it, if you guys like what you hear and see, do hit that like and subscribe button. It does help my channel, and it also helps the algorithm just a little bit. With that being said, I will say this: there will be spoilers, and I will be covering a little bit about the music later on. So, while this film is a fictional depiction of firefighters, those who have worked the job can also attest to the difficulty of what they go through, as well as some of the positions. Like, for example, the investigators. Those who investigate the fires, they can argue that the scientific aspect, at least to quote from the film, what they say about, fire having a character and all that, not exactly true. But the main story itself is about two brothers having to work together when there's an arsonist that tries to set fires to particular buildings that target specific government officials. But before I forget, let me get straight to how to put this. Oh yeah, the ones that were part of it. So as you can see here, it was directed by Ron Howard. We got Kurt Russell, who plays Stephen, William Baldwin, who plays the younger brother Brian, Robert De Niro, who plays Donald Rimgold. I'm gonna mess up the name again. Give me 1 second. Donald Rimgale, call sign Shadow. And of course, we have the late Donald Sutherland, who played the pyromaniac Ronald Bartel. We also have, give me 1 second. Jennifer Jason Lee. She played Jennifer Vetkus. Scott Glenn, who plays John Adcox, call sign Axe. We also have Rebecca De Mornay, who plays Helen McCaffrey, the wife of Stephen. Want to point out something real quick. I did mention that she was also in The Three Musketeers, and I covered that in a previous episode, but she's also in this one. We also have Jason Gedrick, who plays Tim Krasinski, the unfortunate probie who gets hit by a backdraft. I'll go into that a little bit later as I go through the story. We also have J.T. Walsh, who plays Alderman Marty Swayzak. That is the father of Stephen and Brian. I mean, sorry, I don't know why I said that. I'm tripping here. It's been a while since I watched. Swayzak was the politician who wanted to become mayor. I misspoke there. That's on me. Been a while. But I did watch it again recently Anyway, let's get straight to it. So, again, I kind of gave the main gist of it. This film does point out the different perspectives of the brothers and their estranged family relationship, and the fact that the wife, Helen, divorced Stephen and took custody of the kid because Stephen's being reckless, has no regard for his own life. Despite being a somewhat seasoned firefighter, Brian, his younger brother, also eventually decides to become one himself. But here's an interesting part. It shows in the film 1971, their father answers a call about a fire in an apartment, and Brian accompanies him, but they lose their father due to the fact when um, Adcock spots a gas line, but saves him, but loses his life in the process. And when Brian gets reassigned to their father's unit, there's a moment that when Brian is late for work, we learn that there's some Backdraft victims, and Donald Rimgale, played by Robert De Niro, he's a veteran firefighter and also an arson investigator. And he recognizes the style and signature to a certain pyromaniac that he knows. Now, as I mentioned later on, there is a strain on family ties because, again, Stephen's reckless to an extent. And despite Brian trying to learn, the two constantly keep butting heads every now and then. There's an argument that breaks out, and Brian does eventually transfer to become Rimgale's assistant. So there's a point where they visit the pyromaniac, Ronald Bartel, played by the late Donald Sutherland. There's a part that I remember where, as they're talking, Bartel's asking Brian, "Did the fire look at you?" And not much is said, but the expression that Brian gives is enough to communicate to Bartel that I did look at him. And there is one moment during their investigations that Rimgale does point out to Brian that in order to beat the fire, in order to beat it, you need to think like it. But the quote, however, is one that most arson investigators actually disagree with. Now, the thing with Wikipedias, they're pretty useful in trying to get quick information, but nowadays they easily fall victim to stupid revisions. Emphasis on the word stupid. And it doesn't matter if it's the regular Wikipedias, I've seen it a lot with fan wikis as well. Which is why most of us keep saying, you can be a fan of an IP. Just know when to disregard fan groups. Most fan groups. I'm talking 95 to 99% of them. Because they've been infected. Now, let me get to a certain point here. So, according to the wiki regarding the realism, before I get to the rest of the film, they point out that most scenes displaying the firefighting, they didn't go in without the CBA, self-contained breathing apparatus, and also since there's a lot of smoke, realistically, it does obscure their vision. So the way how they did this, it's not accurate. And I agree with them because they've been through this stuff. Yes, they're trying to portray something, but it didn't hit the mark. Furthermore, according to the wiki, it mentions that fire investigation professionals, they dismissed the investigative methods used in the film. And here's where I'll get to the quote. Robert De Niro's character, Gale, says, that fire is a living entity. It breathes, it eats, and it hates, to quote his character. However, the Wikipedia does state that that is simply not true, because they just give a rough guess as to what they do. So they didn't consult with said people. But then again, you didn't have the internet back then. This was in 1991. The internet wasn't even around yet. So, with that being said, there is a call at a moment during a high-rise fire, as I mentioned, and the veteran Adcox, call sign Axe, he's telling the brothers regarding this, you're better off waiting for backup. But Stephen is being impulsive, and he didn't listen. So, unfortunately, remember when I mentioned about Tim Krasinski? That's Brian's partner. The way he didn't check the door was arguably foolish. But unfortunately, Tim gets injured, and it's at this point where when they decide to, or Brian and Remigale decide to investigate Swayzak, the politician. By the time they get there, someone's already beaten them to the punch, and they find someone trying to start a fire. Both Brian and Remigale confront the masked man. The masked man does get injured, and they do manage to save the politician. But the backdraft does still happen. The only difference is, yes, they get out, but unfortunately, Donald does get injured by getting impaled on a metal fence. While being in the hospital, he gets really upset that it's like, I can't do anything because of this. So he relies on Brian to get some more information and advises him to visit the pyromaniac again. And during the interrogation/investigation, Bartell helps Brian steer him in the right direction. And I don't remember the exact name of the chemical, but Bartell does pose one particular question. Who hates fire so much that he hangs around a particular chemical? And it's at that point where Brian learns that only a firefighter would be so careful to not let a backdraft burn out of control. He thinks it's his brother Stephen, but when he goes to confront him, unfortunately, by the time they learn of another fire that's about to break out, he learns that Adcox is there. But he also spots on his shoulder a burn mark from an electrical outlet, like the one behind me. So Brian's able to piece the whole thing together, and he's like, damn, I gotta tell my brother about this. But he also realizes that Adcox has overheard the conversation between the brothers. And they reach a chemical plant, and then that's where things start to go south. So Stephen confronts Adcox. Adcox doesn't deny it. And unfortunately, Adcox points out that Swayzek benefited from those firefighters dying, ones that he knew, and likely ones that his father knew, because those firehouses were closed out. But unfortunately, Adcox doesn't make it. Stephen's barely holding on to his life. And then Brian is the one trying to fight the fire. And in doing so, he allows a couple of firefighters to help get his brother out. Unfortunately, later on, Stephen does die. But before he does so, he does ask his brother Brian to not let the crew know about Adcox and what he did. So eventually, Brian and Rimgale confront Swayzek with the evidence that they found, thereby ending his career. As a result, Brian then continues on the family business of being a firefighter, despite the fact that he now lost his older brother and his father. But he knows the risks that comes along with it. And with it, arguably, in my opinion, a newfound respect. So now let's get to the music a bit. So most of us likely recognize it from a particular TV show. Now, I want to point out, I do know about this show from Food Network back in the day. Let me just pull it up real quick. Give me one moment. Does this look familiar? Yeah. Most of the music from the Backdraft soundtrack was used for this show, Iron Chef. And I know it because I've definitely watched it back in the day. So most of us, when we're listening to the music, luckily think of this show. Unfortunately, when it got picked up, they replaced the music, and I'm like, damn it. But anyway, it occurred to me there's a few particular tracks from the soundtrack that do play. The most familiar ones are, let me double check. Oh yeah, Fighting 17th and Show Me Your Fire Truck. Mainly those two for the start of the show as well as the end of it. Then we also got the track Burn It All. That's a very familiar one. But if you want a little bit of perspective, let me go and pull it up. So I'm only just going to be doing a small segment of this, just for some context. That particular part that I just played was right when the ingredient was about to be revealed for the theme. But that's not the only musical bit that some of us recognized. There's one in particular, at least, no, actually I misspoke. I'm blanking out a little bit. There's another part from this track that is very familiar to most of us. So let me try and pull it up. So it's actually at the very beginning of this track that it occurred to me. I've heard it numerous times, but the only one that sticks out in my head was when I was watching the trailer for The Lost World Jurassic Park. It's right around here. Now, while it does suck that they're no longer playing the soundtrack to that film, I will admit that the film does work as an action suspense film while over dramatizing. I don't know if that's the actual term, but it kind of has a false account of how firefighters conduct themselves when it comes to dealing with fires. What do they experience and all of that? Do they have some parts right? A little bit, but that's like what, 5%, I'd say. And most of it's fictional anyway. So, yeah, it didn't do it entirely justice per se. Now, I will say that the music definitely has an impact as it relates to most firefighters around the world, no matter what ethnic background you are. Those of you guys who have gone through it know it better than me and can tell that what you guys experience is not the same as the film. So, objectively, I'd give this one at best a 7 out of 10. Subjectively, I'd say maybe 8 out of 10. But yeah, as we can tell, we lost another great one. One thing I will say, and I know other people have pointed this out, the media outlets, what they chose to cite for Sutherland, honestly, that's a flippin' insult. Honestly, it's a freaking insult. Hunger Games, really pathetic. The guy has been in other films, and frankly, I know others would mention the TV show MASH. That was before I was born, I can tell you that much. But overall, I definitely enjoyed this film. Do I think it's accurate? Not entirely. Some aspects, yes, but not all of it. With that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this quick overview slash summary slash general thoughts on a classic 90s film. This has been Skyhound, also known as Geek Archivist Xavier Pierce. Stay safe, stay sane, and as Orange had always said, stay humble. Also, rest in peace, Mr. Donald Sutherland. You will be missed.